Could you live a double life for 15 years just to take down the bad guys? Or would you crack? Share your answer below, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Back to the story. The bank closed every night at exactly 6 p.m. By 6:10, the last employees had filed out, the security guards took their posts, and the great steel doors of the vault were sealed with a hiss of hydraulics and the soft click of the tumblers locking into place. For 15 years, no one paid much attention to the quiet man in the blue custodian's uniform who arrived just after 6:15, mop and bucket in hand. His name was Clarence. And he had a job to do. Every evening, 5 nights a week, Clarence swept the same floors, emptied the same trash bins, and dusted the same teller windows. He rarely spoke. He never made eye contact. And he never, ever drew attention to himself. But then one Tuesday night, seemingly out of nowhere, he walked out of the bank with $2 million in cash, and not a single soul stopped him. That morning, Clarence had ridden the bus to work like always. He sat in his usual seat, reading his usual dog-eared paperback. The driver nodded at him as he stepped off at the corner. He even brought his lunch that day, the same bologna sandwich and apple he'd been bringing for years. But there was one difference. Tucked inside his lunchbox, beneath the sandwich, sat a small, folded sheet of paper. On it were 3 short sentences written in perfect, blocky handwriting. Tonight, after the vault resets, you have 6 minutes. No one will stop you. What would you do if you found a note like that? Would you follow it? Or throw it away? Let me know in the comments, because Clarence didn't even hesitate. By the time the clock struck 6:15, Clarence was inside, just as always, pushing his mop bucket across the marble floors. But tonight, his eyes lingered on the cameras overhead, on the guards chatting at their post, on the keypad by the vault door. And at exactly 6:23, when no one was looking, he pulled off his gloves and started walking toward the vault. Clarence's footsteps were steady, unhurried. If anyone on the security cameras had been paying close attention, it would have looked like just another night, just another janitor on his rounds. But Clarence knew better. Every second mattered. At 6:23 exactly, the bank's automated system entered a maintenance cycle, resetting the vault door sensors and cameras for a brief 6-minute window while the overnight security software booted. Clarence hadn't discovered that by accident. No. He'd spent years waiting, watching, learning. And when the timing finally lined up, so did his courage. At the vault door, he slipped on a pair of black nitrile gloves, took a small magnetic card from his pocket, and swiped it through the panel. Beep. The panel lit up green. Clarence smiled faintly. Someone had gotten him this card. Someone with access. Someone who wanted him to succeed. Inside the vault, the air was cool and still. Stacks of cash sat in neat bundles, each one labeled and secured. He walked straight to the second shelf on the right, just like the note had said, and began loading bundles of $100 bills into his mop bucket. No duffel bags. No weapons. No drama. Just a quiet man filling a bucket. By the time the system rebooted at 6:29, Clarence had already closed the vault door behind him and was back in the lobby, whistling softly as he pushed his bucket toward the service entrance. No one looked up. No one cared. And as he stepped out into the alley, a light drizzle falling over the city, Clarence kept walking and never looked back. Now, let me ask you, if you were Clarence, would you keep walking? Or would you turn yourself in? Let us know in the comments, because the real story is just beginning. Somewhere across town, a phone rang. "It's done," Clarence's calm voice said. On the other end of the line, a woman's voice replied. "Good. Now disappear." The next morning, chaos erupted at the bank. When the branch manager unlocked the vault, his scream could be heard all the way to the lobby. Half a dozen employees rushed in, only to find the shelves stripped bare in one corner, neat stacks of cash gone without a trace. Security cameras? Nothing but static between 6:23 and 6:29. Guard logs? No unusual activity recorded. Doors? All still locked from the inside. It was, as one investigator muttered later, like a ghost walked in and helped himself. But ghosts don't leave mop water on the vault floor. And by noon, detectives had narrowed their focus to one unlikely suspect, the janitor. Across town, Clarence sat in a dingy motel room, staring at the pile of cash spread across the bed. The woman he'd called earlier, her name was Elena, leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching him. "You did well," she said flatly. "Now we wait for the buyer." Clarence looked up at her, his brow furrowed. "You never told me what this was really about," he said. Elena smirked. "The less you know, the better. Just know this, they're going to come looking. You need to stay invisible." Clarence said nothing. He'd been invisible his whole life. But Detective Sam Keller was anything but invisible. By sunset, he was pounding the pavement, showing Clarence's photo to every bus driver, convenience store clerk, and motel manager in the city. At the fourth motel he hit, the clerk stiffened when he saw the picture. Yeah, that's him. Room 214. He's got some lady with him, too." Keller's pulse quickened. He radioed for backup and headed up the stairs. "Room 214. Don't let them leave." Now pause for a moment. Imagine you're Clarence. You've pulled off the perfect heist, but already you hear sirens in the distance. Would you fight, run, or turn yourself in? Drop your answer in the comments below. What would you do in his shoes? Upstairs, Clarence heard the faint crunch of boots on the motel walkway. He and Elena locked eyes. "Time to go," she whispered. Without another word, she scooped up one of the cash bundles, slipped a pistol from her waistband, and kicked open the bathroom window. "You coming or not?" Clarence hesitated, just for a second, then followed her into the night. Behind them, the door to room 214 burst open. But it was already empty. Clarence and Elena slipped into the shadows behind the motel, the cold air sharp against their skin as they darted down an alley and toward a waiting car. It was an old black sedan with tinted windows. Elena yanked the door open, pushed Clarence into the passenger seat, and gunned the engine before he could say a word. "They're faster than I thought," she muttered, weaving through traffic as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. "We need to get to the drop before sunrise." Clarence clutched the cash bag on his lap, watching her drive. "And after the drop?" he asked. "Then what?" Elena's smirk didn't reach her eyes. "Then you disappear for good." But somewhere in his gut, Clarence felt the first twinge of doubt. She'd been too calm, too prepared. And the way she kept glancing at her phone, like she was waiting for a message. Hours later, they reached a warehouse at the edge of town. A pair of armed men stood outside under a single yellow floodlight. Elena stopped the car and got out, motioning for Clarence to follow. "Stay quiet and let me do the talking," she whispered. Inside, a man in a tailored suit sat at a table, smoking a thin cigar. He barely looked up as they entered. "You have it?" he asked. Elena dropped the cash on the table with a thud. The man opened the bag, thumbed through a stack of bills, and smiled faintly. "Good girl," he said. "We'll wire your cut in the morning." Elena's face hardened. "Where's his?" The man glanced at Clarence, then back at Elena. "His? He's just a janitor. He doesn't walk out of here." Clarence froze. "What?" Before he could move, one of the armed guards grabbed his arm and shoved him to his knees. "Sorry, old man," Elena said coldly. "Nothing personal. Someone has to take the fall. Have you ever trusted the wrong person, only to realize too late they were playing you all along? How would you feel in this moment? Angry, betrayed, or calm? Let me know in the comments, because Clarence wasn't done yet. On the floor, Clarence let out a long, slow breath. Then, he smiled. "That's cute," he said softly. "You think I didn't see this coming?" The silence in the warehouse was heavy after Clarence spoke. The man in the suit arched an eyebrow. Elena stiffened, her hand inching toward her waistband. And the two guards flanking Clarence exchanged confused glances. "What did you just say?" Elena hissed. Clarence, still on his knees, kept smiling faintly. "I said, that's cute. You think I didn't see this coming?" Then his eyes locked on the man in the suit. "And you? You really thought you were the only one paying me?" The man frowned now, his cigar drooping between his fingers. "What are you talking about?" Clarence chuckled under his breath. "You think someone like me works a dead-end janitor job for 15 years just for the pension? No. You weren't the only ones watching me." Before anyone could react, Clarence reached into his pocket, very slowly, and pulled out a tiny black device. A flashing red light blinked on top of it. "What the hell is that?" Elena barked. Clarence just smirked. "That is my insurance policy." Suddenly, the warehouse floodlights flared blinding white. And from the catwalks above, a dozen tactical officers in black descended ropes with rifles drawn. "FBI. Nobody move." Elena's face drained of color. The man in the suit went pale, and the two guards dropped their weapons immediately. Clarence rose to his feet, brushing himself off, and looked Elena dead in the eyes. "You're not the only one who can play people, sweetheart. Now imagine this. The person you thought was the pawn just turned out to be the king. Would you be furious? Or impressed? Let me know in the comments, because this was only the beginning of Clarence's checkmate." One of the agents approached Clarence and gave him a firm nod. "Nice work, Mr. Barnes," the agent said. "We've got everything on tape. Cartel's finished." Elena's jaw dropped. "Barnes, you're one of them." Clarence finally let the smirk stretch into a real smile. "Not just one of them. I was the whole up." He turned to the man in the suit as agents cuffed him. $2 million in marked bills. 15 years of undercover work. And you still thought you were running the show. That's adorable." As the agents led Elena and the cartel boss away in handcuffs, the warehouse was buzzing with controlled chaos. One by one, black SUVs pulled up outside, and heavily armed officers ferried out crates of evidence, bags of cash, and stacks of files. Clarence, or rather, Agent Barnes, stood near the back wall, finally removing the blue custodian jacket he'd worn like a second skin for over a decade. Underneath, he straightened his crisp white shirt, his badge glinting faintly under the lights. The lead agent walked over and clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good work here, Barnes. Took a hell of a long time, but you nailed them." Clarence's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. 15 years of mopping floors. 15 years of watching them launder money, move drugs, ruin lives. All while pretending I was nothing. Guess it was worth it. The agent gave him a look of quiet respect. "You'll be a legend for this one." But even as he said it, Clarence's mind drifted to Elena. She sat in the back of one of the SUVs now, her face pressed to the glass, staring at him. And for just a second, he saw something in her eyes that unsettled him. Not hatred, not fear, but respect. And something darker. A promise. "Now tell me, if you spent 15 years living someone else's life just to bring down the bad guys, and you finally won, would you feel satisfied? Or empty?" Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because Clarence was about to find out. Later that night, the warehouse stood empty again. Clarence stood alone under the same yellow floodlight, the mop bucket beside him like an old friend. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded note, the same one that had started it all. "Tonight, after the vault resets, you have 6 minutes. No one will stop you." He turned it over in his hands, and on the back was something he hadn't noticed before. A faint line of handwriting, barely legible. "See you again someday." Clarence's smile faded, and somewhere in the dark, far beyond the reach of the floodlight, a pair of eyes watched him, unseen. Months later, the city had all but forgotten about the daring undercover sting at Midland First Bank. The papers ran headlines like, "Cartel busted in massive FBI operation." Inside the mind of the man who played janitor for 15 years. The ghost in blue who took down a criminal empire. Clarence, or Agent Barnes, never gave a statement. He never spoke to the press. And by spring, he was gone from the city entirely. But whispers of him remained. Among agents, they called him the custodian. A man who cleaned up messes no one else could touch. And somewhere in a quiet diner outside a different town, Clarence sat at the counter with a cup of black coffee and a plain bologna sandwich. A young waitress smiled at him and said, "Haven't seen you before. You just passing through." Clarence smiled faintly, the same calm smile he'd worn all those years. "Something like that," he said. Across the street, in a black SUV, Elena watched from the driver's seat. Her lips curved into the faintest smirk as she whispered to herself, "Till next time, custodian." She started the engine and melted into traffic, already planning her next move. And Clarence? He just sipped his coffee, already thinking 3 moves ahead. So tell me, if you lived your life undercover, knowing your enemies were still out there, could you ever really rest? Or would you keep watching your back forever? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Because some stories never really end.